Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In this lesson, inshallah, we'll be analyzing the poem Blessing by Imtiaz Dharker. So let us begin with the first two lines. The skin cracks like a pot, there never is enough water. So the poem begins with a compact two-line stanza. The first line is a simile, and the second offers context for that simile. The skin cracks like a pot, simile. Okay, and what is the context for that simile? Because there never is enough water. So these lines begin to describe the poem's setting without naming a particular place. This is a location that suffers from a chronic water shortage, perhaps a community located in a hot, dry climate. In fact, water is so scarce here that the skin cracks like a pod, like a seed pod. Okay, so as people and animals they struggle with chronic dehydration, what happens to them? Their skin painfully cracks. This opening simile is a subtle reminder that humans are part of nature. We are forced to cope with the climate just like plants and other creatures. From the start, the poem's sound helps bring its imagery to life. The K consonants in the opening line, the skin cracks like a pod, sounds harsh and unpleasant. I've told you numerous times that this p, k, b, t, all these sounds are known to be plosives and harsh sounds. Okay, so this k sound, this consonants of skin cracks like all these sounds are harsh and they are unpleasant and they have been presented in the opening line. Okay, so they sound harsh and unpleasant like the condition that they are describing. What is the condition? The lack of water, the scarcity of water. The N consonants in line 2, the fact of it highlights the fact of scarcity. There never is enough water. Okay, though the poem is written in free verse. What is free verse? There isn't any rhyme scheme, there isn't any meter. So devices like when there isn't free verse, so devices like consonants and assonance, they add up the lyricism, they add the music to its language. Meanwhile, the short lines of these opening stanzas, they seem to reflect the shortage of water, especially compared with the free flowing lines of the later stanza. Let us move on to the next lines. Imagine the drip of it, the small splash, echo in a tin mug, the voice of a kindly God. So, in the second stanza, the speaker suddenly addresses the reader. Imagine the drip of it. Imagine the drip of it. The speaker urges, meaning the faint sound of water in this terribly dry climate. The next few lines describe the water in metaphorical terms. The small splash echo in a tin mug, the voice of a kindly God. What is metaphor over here? The voice of a kindly God. So the image of droplets falling in a tin mug, it works on two levels. There can be two deviations, two directions to it, two meanings to it. First, it is highly specific. It is helping readers to conjure up the faint metallic clinking sound in their minds. Second, it is the first specifically human reference in the poem, since the skin in line 1 could also belong to animals. Okay, so it provides a glimpse of the human response to this dry climate. Evidently, people in the area collect small drops of moisture from occasional rain or perhaps unreliable plumbing in tin mugs. These they receive each drop that falls in the mugs as an expression of divine generosity. Because the water is scarce, therefore, any single drop of the water it feels like a voice of a kindly God. So, as the title hints, this is a place where water, any water, it feels like a blessing. Short I assonance is found over here. Imagine I imagine in the beginning and in the middle of the word imagine, drip and it. And there is an internal rhyme, in and tin. All these E sounds, they echo throughout these lines, mimicking the echo of dripping water. Again, the short lines seem to reflect the shortage of water or perhaps the need to conserve energy in this hot, thirsty place. Let us move ahead from line 7 till 12. Sometimes the sudden rush of fortune, the municipal pipe bursts, silver crashes to the ground, and the flow has found a roar of tongues. From the huts, a congregation. So, in these lines, the poem takes a turn. Sometimes the speaker says, this water deprived area, this water deprived community, sometimes it experiences a sudden rush of fortune. This good luck comes in the form of a literal rush of water which discharges when the local municipal pipe bursts. Suddenly, the people have an abundance of water they crave for. It crashes to the ground like a flow of precious silver, prompting a surprised, joyful roar of tongues throughout the neighborhood. From the huts surrounding the broken pipe, a congregation of local people pours outside their house and come forward towards the water. The word congregation, sorry, the word congregation can mean any kind of gathering, but it often refers specifically to a religious gathering. हम नमाज के अंदर भी क्या कहते हैं जमात को congregational prayers. So any kind of religious gathering is known as congregational gathering, such as a group of worshippers in church as well. So the connotations of this word imply once again that the thirsty local street water as a divine gift, a sign of favor from a kindly God. Similarly, the phrase roar of tongues, it might allude to the practice of speaking in tongues, a form of worship or spiritual expression found in some Christian texts. The word hurts, it suggests that this community is water deprived in part because it's economically deprived. So, partial reason, half reason for this community, or major reason for this community to be deprived is that it is economically deprived. It is no, it is visible to us, apparent to us by the use of the word huts, not just because it is in a hot climate, but also because it is in an economically deprived place. So Dharkar, the writer of this poem, he based the poem's unnamed setting on the Dharavi slum in Mumbai, India. So the residents of these huts, they aren't stuck in the desert, but they seem to be among the poorer residents of their city. Presumably, they're hit especially hard by water shortages because the city doesn't devote enough resources to their area. So, in this setting, the water from the broken pipes seems to shower down like the blessing of the title. Notice the irony, though the water isn't actually a divine gift or even the product of human generosity or political competence. It is rather an accident, seemingly born of the same political neglect that aggravated the water shortage in the first place. So, in other words, the same municipal leaders who have left this neighborhood desperate for water have also left the water pipe in disrepair so that it breaks not once but sometimes, as it has been suggested in the verses. No one at higher levels of leadership in their country or elsewhere has intervened to help either. So, while the gathering congregation might treat or be forced to treat the burst pipe as a gift from heaven, the situation is really a sign of human inequality. Let us move ahead from lines 12 to 17. Okay, so every man, woman, a child from for streets around butts in with pots, brass, copper, aluminium, plastic buckets, frantic hands. So lines 12 till 17, which I have just read, they continue to describe the gathering around the burst water pipe. The language takes on the rapid rushing quality of the water, even omitting commas in the phrase every man, woman, child for streets around. It is as if punctuation here would only slow things down, and as if the men, women, and children themselves blur into a single mass. There is no difference. They're coming towards the water as a single unified mass, unified body. So notice also that line 12, a congregation, and then there is a pause. Every man, woman, like line 8 of fortune, then pause. The municipal pipe burst is longer than any line in the first two stanzas, and this third stanza is significantly longer than the previous two stanzas. So the poem, like the pipe, seems to have broken open and started to flow more freely now. The form of the poem, it actually mirrors the abrupt narrative shift, the juxtaposition between extreme deprivation and then sudden abundance as well. The phrase for streets around helps confirm that this water starved setting is a city neighborhood. It isn't a desert outpost, okay, na? As some might have predicted earlier. Everyone who runs to the pipe, he butts in or elbows forward to collect the water in various containers. The speaker lifts a few of these containers in lines full of lively consonants and assonance, which you're going to find in butts in with spots, brass, copper, aluminium, plastic, buckets, frantic. So notice, for example, the TS sound in butts and pots and buckets, the alliteration of b in butts in brass, and then the alliteration of p in pots and plastic, and then the assonance between pots and copper, the o sound, the shade and sound in frantic hands, and then so on. This jumble of echoes, which includes a number of powerful p and b sounds, it helps convey the jostling, fast-paced chaos of the scene. As for the containers themselves, they are a diverse collection, from sturdy copper pots to cheap plastic pails, suggesting that people are grabbing whatever's at hand before rushing towards the water. Some even collect the water in their own frantic hands. The word frantic ends the stanza on a note of hard realism. This gathering, it might seem almost like a spontaneous block party, but the participants are desperate for water to drink and bathe in. That's why they are frantic. Then move on to the last line. And naked children screaming in the liquid sun, their highlights polished to perfection, flashing light as the blessing sings over their small bones. The final stanza, in this final stanza, the speaker describes a sight that seems innocent and cute, but it contains darker undertones. The naked children screaming in the liquid sun, their highlights polished to perfection, flashing light. In slightly metaphorical language, liquid sun, polished, these lines describe kids playing around the gushing pipe as if under a sprinkler. They are shrieking excitedly as the sun shines down on them in a watery blur. They look fresh scrubbed or polished by the water, and sunlight glints off their skin in flashing highlights. While this image sounds playful and the kids seem to be enjoying themselves, the fact that they are naked and screaming, it also reminds the reader that they have suffered deprivation. They may be undressed simply to bathe in the water, but they may also have relatively few clothes to wear. The closing metaphor strikes a similarly haunting note. The blessing sings over their small bones. The water may seem to come as a gift from the gods, singing like a choir as it splashes. But that's only because these kids and their community are terribly vulnerable. Indeed,
Small bones sounds like a quiet reminder of death, a possible consequence of water scarcity. The gushing water is the result of human error, not divine, and it offers only an accidental, temporary relief from a problem that's likely to continue. Now, let us move on to the themes of this poem. The first theme is, and the only theme is, scarcity, poverty, and desperation. Imtiaz Dharker's Blessing, it portrays a community with a hot, dry climate where water is scarce. When water suddenly gushes from a broken municipal pipe, the whole community crowds in to cool off and collect water while they can. Though the resulting scene is joyful, it is also frantic and ominous. Though there seems to be plenty of water for now, the speaker notes there never is enough. And while the poem shows how shared hardship can create scenes of communal congregation, it depicts scarcity and poverty on the whole as sources of constant desperation. The poem establishes that this is a poor community, desperate for water. The community lives in huts or simple houses, and children are they are naked, suggesting they lack adequate clothing. Nakedness is often associated with exposure and deprivation. The speaker says that there never is enough water to go around, and the hydrated skin of the residents it cracks like a pod. In other words, the lack of water is stressful and painful. The community daydreams about just the drip of water, seeking or awaiting it like the voice of a kindly God. These fantasies speak to how desperate they are, a desperation the speaker urges the reader to imagine. In this environment, the occasional overflow of water feels like a blessing. So the poem's final image, the blessing of water sings over their small bones. It is an image of temporary abundance, but also a stark illustration of the children's vulnerability. It carries the suggestion that they may be undernourished, skeletally thin, as well as dehydrated, and it symbolically raises the idea of death, a possible consequence of scarcity. While the poem doesn't name its setting, its descriptions evoke various hot and impoverished regions. These are regions where water scarcity is a real and growing problem, one that other countries and the wealthy elite often cruelly ignore. So, Blessing can be read as a political poem illustrating contemporary struggles. More broadly, it reflects the complex common experience of poverty and scarcity, including the way periodic relief from deprivation can seem like both a blessing and the sign of a larger cruelty. Let us move on to the symbol. The basic symbol of the poem Blessing is water itself. Because water is essential to survival, it is a symbol of life, energy, and vitality. It can also represent purity and cleanliness. In many traditions, it is associated with holiness and spiritual renewal. Blessing plays on all these associations. In the arid climate of the poem, the smallest drip of water seems wholly like the voice of a kindly God. Occasionally, it bursts into the streets of the community as a blessed force of renewal. It flows from the municipal pipe like a rush of fortune, almost a divine gift. It seems to restore the energy of the community, which swarms around it like a religious congregation. As naked children bathe in it, it contributes to an image of purity and innocence. All this symbolism implies what the poet has said explicitly about Dharavi, the Mumbai slum on which the poem setting is based. If the monsoon arrives, if the water comes by some miracle of God, by some act of kindness, or some great mistake which the people wait for, if that water arrives, it is a miracle. Therefore, it is a blessing. That water is considered such a blessing, meanwhile, emphasizes the poverty and deprivation of this place, where something essential to life becomes luxury. With this, we are going to move on to the poetic devices and the figurative language of the poem Blessing. The first one happens to be metaphor. The poem uses several metaphors and one simile to illustrate the importance of water in its arid setting. First comes a simple but disturbing simile. The skin cracks like a pod. The skin cracks like a pod. The way a seed pod cracks open. It's a blunt, effective image of painful dehydration as well as a reminder that human beings are part of nature. People are as affected by the climate as plants and other creatures. The second stanza compares the drip and splash of water to the voice of a kindly God. This metaphor connects water with the sacred or divine. So, when water is scarce, the speaker suggests even a small droplet seems like a blessing or gift from heaven. Similarly, any overflow of water seems like a sudden rush of fortune. The last stanza, excuse me, the last stanza compares the sun itself to a liquid, as water from the burst pipe jets into the sky. In other words, the sun looks visually distorted through the spray. The kids playing under this sudden sprinkler look polished to perfection, scrubbed clean by the water drenching them. Finally, the speaker compares the splashing water to a blessing that sings over their small bones. Once again, the poem links water with the divine, suggesting the power it holds within and over this hot, dry region. The second device happens to be imagery. The poem is full of striking images. The skin cracks in the harsh, dry heat. The speaker is referring to anyone's skin, the skin of people in general during a water shortage. Excuse me. The speaker invites the reader to imagine the drip of water in this place where water is scarce. Notice that drip is an onomatopoeia. The poem describes the small splash and echo of water drips droplets in a tin mug, comparing this tiny metallic ringing to the voice of a kindly god. The speaker conjures up the silver flow of water from the broken municipal pipe, followed by the avid congregation of people that butts it to collect it. The frantic hands they extend toward the water and the highlight of sun flashing on the bodies of children. The surprised roar of tongues. The description appeals to the ears as well as the eyes. Overall, the rapid flow of imagery conveys the blurred confusion and uproar of the scene. The next device happens to be juxtaposition. The whole poem hinges on a juxtaposition. It contrasts the discomfort of a chronic water shortage with the sudden, though temporary, relief of a gushing water main. The opening stanzas illustrate a community's experience of water scarcity, the painful crackling of skin, the slow and sacred seeming drip of what little water is available. The speaker says that there never is enough water in this climate. The last two stanzas describe a burst water pipe, which represents a sudden rush of fortune for the community. So, the main similarity between these two sections lies in the religious language they apply to the water. During times of scarcity and abundance, alike, the people seem to treat water as a blessing, a gift from a kindly God. Notice that the last two stanzas are longer than the first two. In other words, the poem form reflects its central juxtaposition. Okay, so the last two stanzas, when they are longer than the first two stanzas, it suggests abundance. Okay, na, as compared to the first stanza. The next literary device is consonance. So consonance intensifies the poem's language and helps bring to life the extreme scenes it describes. In line 1, for example, harsh K sounds evoke the painful cracking of dehydrated skin. The skin cracks like a pot. K sounds. In line 4, the repeating sounds of S in small splash. They call to the mind the drip drop of water. In line 7 to 8, the combination of S and P consonants plus the short assonance of sudden rush animates the description of bursting and rushing water. Sometimes the sudden rush of fortune, the municipal pipe bursts. In lines 14 and 17, these lines are sprinkled with bird, tur, ts, k, and l sounds, which give the language a disjointed quality that matches its rapid jumble of images. Butts in with pots, brass, copper, aluminium, plastic buckets, frantic hands. These vivid, complex sounds seem to echo the frantic excitement of the crowd. Then the B and S and NG sounds of the final line as the blessing sings over their small bones. Together with assonance, blessing sings over bones, O sound in over and bones. Consonants makes these lines musical so that the language seems to sing like the rushing water itself. The next one is assonance. Assonance adds lyrical intensity to the poem's description. It reinforces the imagery the poem is describing. In lines 3 to 5, for example, the thin repeating short E sounds evoke the tiny drip of water. Imagine the drip of it, the small splash echo in a tin mug. Okay. Later short assonance highlights the phrase sometimes the sudden rush, emphasizing the suddenness of force of the gush of water. The quick repetition of and sounds in frantic and hands calls up the rapid, desperate movements of the crowd. The repetition of consonant and vowel sounds in highlights and light helps highlight the dazzling imagery of lines 20 and 20. Let us move on to form, meter, and rhymes. Form. Blessing is a free verse poem and it is divided into four stanzas of uneven length. The stanzas break up the narrative into pieces, like just like paragraphs in a story. The choice of free verse suits the spontaneous, disorderly scene that the poem describes. An orderly, predictable form would have clashed with this image of crowd commotion. The stanza lengths are also significant. The first two stanzas, which describe a severe water shortage, are extremely concise. The last two stanzas, which describe the gushing water, main flow at greater length. In this way, the poem's form reflects the transition from scarcity to abundance. Meter. Blessing is a fever's poem, so it doesn't have a meter. The unpredictability of the lines seem to reflect the nature of life in this municipality, in this community. Here, fortune itself can be miserly or generous from moment to moment. For example, the residents may go weeks or months with very little water, then experience a sudden rush of water. Though there never is enough water, one reason perhaps that the lines never become long and flowing. Then the rhyming scheme. A free as a free verse poem, Blessing has no rhyme scheme. However, there are occasional subtle rhymes or slant rhymes at the ends of lines. For example, pod and god between line 1 and 6. Round, pound, and around in lines 9, 10, and 13. And huts and pots in lines 11 and 14. Though these rhymes may seem incidental, they add to the poem's musicality and emotional intensity. Notice that they cluster around the passage where the long awaited water bursts forth. With this, we're going to move on to the literary context. Imtiaz Dharker is a British poet. She now divides her time between London and Mumbai, whose hot, dry climate and Dharavi neighborhood inspired this poem's setting. Common themes among her books include questions of identity, home and exile, cultural displacement, and community. And this idea can be seen in this poem of hers as well. Historical context. Dharkar has explained that she had the slums of Mumbai. Dharkar had explained that she had the slums of Mumbai, India, in mind when writing this poem. Despite India's recent rapid economic growth, over 40% of the population of Mumbai, which is the India's largest city, formerly known as Bombay, lives in slums. The largest of these poorer neighborhoods is Dharavi, which has a population of around 7 lakh. Much of this population density stems from migration as people move to the city seeking greater economic opportunity. Blessing depicts the kind of water shortages that frequently trouble this area. According to Dharkar, during the roasting heat of the dry season, the arrival of water, whether via monsoon, an act of kindness or a mistake, all of these represent a miracle for Mumbai's poorer residents. At the same time, the poem highlights the vibrant expression of life that these slums represent. Though they are difficult and impoverished places to live, their residents persist with their lives in the face of immense challenges. With this, we're going to end this poem. I hope you've understood everything. If you've got questions, please feel free to ask.